My parents sold my 8-year-old son antique piano for $89,000 so my sister could build a home theater for her toddler. When my grandfather found out what they did with his gift, he did not scream or shout. He simply smiled and said two sentences that made the blood drain completely from my parents' faces. They had no idea who they had really stolen from. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old and a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. I track missing millions for a living. So when my own family tried to pull a fast one on me, they picked the absolute worst target. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your toxic family exactly who they are dealing with. I had just returned from a grueling 4-day audit in Chicago. All I wanted was to hug my son Leo and sleep for a week. But as I pulled into the driveway of my home, a chill ran down my spine. The back patio gate was wide open. The glass near the lock was completely shattered, glittering on my hardwood floor like crushed ice in the afternoon sun. Panic seized my chest. I dropped my suitcase and sprinted inside, screaming Leo's name, even though I knew he was safe at his babysitter house. The living room felt entirely wrong. It took my exhausted brain a fraction of a second to process the massive, gaping void against the far wall. The antique 1920s Steinway piano was gone. It was not just a piece of furniture. It was a priceless heirloom gifted to Leo by his great-grandfather Marcus to nurture his genuine prodigy-level talent. Someone had ripped his heart right out of our home. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking violently as I dialed 911. Before the operator could even pick up the line, a text message popped up on my screen. It was from my mother, Brenda. "Do not make a scene and do not call the cops. Your father took that dusty old piano. Come to the Sunday cookout at the house and I will explain everything." I hung up the phone before the call connected. A cold, familiar fury washed over me, replacing the panic with pure adrenaline. I did not bother unpacking. I got in my car and drove straight to my parents' house in the affluent suburbs. This was a house they constantly leveraged their credit to maintain. The smell of barbecue ribs and the sound of classic R&B hit me as I walked into the backyard. Family members were laughing, drinking, and acting as if my home had not just been violated. I marched straight to the patio where my mother was hovering over the expensive outdoor grill. I demanded to know where my son's piano was. Without even looking at me, my mother picked up a pair of tongs, grabbed a burnt dry piece of chicken, and dropped it onto a flimsy paper plate. She shoved it into my chest, while handing a beautiful porcelain plate of perfectly glazed ribs to my younger sister Chloe. "Eat something and lower your voice," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively as if I were a nuisance. "Your house is way too cramped for that giant block of wood anyway. Trevor found a private collector who wanted it. He sold it for $89,000. You broke into my house and sold my son piano," I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My father Calvin chimed in from his lawn chair. "We did not break in. You gave us an emergency key 3 years ago. We are family, Maya." Trevor needed the cash to build a custom home theater for little Braden. It is an investment in the family future. Trevor is doing big things in crypto right now, and he needs a proper space to entertain his wealthy clients. Trevor, my sister, insufferable white husband, leaned against the marble counter they absolutely could not afford. He gave me that familiar, condescending look he always reserved just for me. "Look, Maya," he said, swirling his expensive wine. "A single black mother living in your neighborhood really should not keep valuables like that lying around anyway. I am doing you a massive favor. I am protecting you from a real break-in. Do not make this a whole angry black woman reality show moment. Just relax." Chloe smirked. She took a delicate sip of her drink and looked me up and down. "Honestly, Maya, you have been incredibly selfish since college. Remember when you hid your full ride scholarship money so Mom and Dad could not use it to pay for my summer study abroad in Paris? Consider this paying your debt to the family." They all stared at me, expecting me to cry, to scream, to give them the emotional reaction they thrived on. But my tears had dried up years ago when I realized this family viewed me as a resource rather than a daughter. I looked at the burnt piece of chicken on the flimsy paper plate in my hand. I looked at the $89,000 secret they thought they could just sweep under the rug. I did not scream. I did not give them the satisfaction of breaking down. Instead, I calmly walked over to Trevor. He was still smiling that arrogant, privileged smile, expecting me to back down like I always did when we were kids. Without breaking eye contact, I took his $100 glass of wine and slowly tipped it over, pouring the dark red liquid directly onto his custom Italian leather loafers. I looked dead in my parents' eyes and spoke clearly. "Keep the money. You are going to need every single penny for the upcoming legal fees." Chloe smirked, taking another delicate sip from her crystal glass. I stared at her perfectly glossed lips, realizing my own sister actually believed she was entitled to my son's inheritance. A large hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Trevor. Chloe's husband stepped into my line of sight, wearing a pastel linen shirt and custom leather loafers, looking like a tech bro who had the world figured out. Trevor squeezed my shoulder a little too tight, a classic power move disguised as comfort. He leaned in close, his blue eyes filled with familiar, nauseating condescension. "Maya, let us take a collective breath," Trevor said, his voice dripping with unearned authority. "You are highly emotional, but Calvin and Brenda were actually doing you a massive favor." I shrugged his hand off. "A favor?" I repeated deadpan. "You break into my home, steal an $89,000 heirloom, and call it a favor?" Trevor chuckled softly. "Look at the neighborhood you live in, Maya. A single black mother living alone with a young boy really should not keep high-value artifacts in her living room. It makes you a target. I sold the piano to a private collector who can appreciate it. I am protecting you and Leo from your own lack of foresight." The audacity hung in the humid air. He was weaponizing my race, my neighborhood, and my status as a single mother to justify grand larceny. My mother nodded vigorously. "Trevor is right, Maya. You are always so defensive." I looked at my father, Calvin, sipping a beer like this was a normal discussion. "You are letting this man speak to your daughter this way?" I asked. Calvin refused to meet my eyes. "The man got us $89,000, Maya. Do not be ungrateful." Trevor smiled a triumphant grin, stepping closer with a glass of vintage red wine in his hand. "Listen to your parents, Maya. You are doing well at that accounting firm, but you do not understand asset management. Let us adults handle big financial decisions. Do not be another angry black woman on a reality show making a scene over nothing. Just relax." There it was, the ultimate trap. If I yelled, I was the angry black woman. If I cried, I was the weak single mother. If I caused a scene, I was the ungrateful daughter ruining the perfect family cookout. They wanted me to explode. They needed me to lose my temper so they could validate their theft and brush me off as crazy. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, but my breathing remained perfectly steady. Years of conducting hostile forensic audits for ruthless corporate executives had taught me how to weaponize silence. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not even frown. I looked at Trevor. I looked at his perfectly styled hair, his expensive linen shirt, and those ridiculous custom leather loafers he bragged about importing from Italy. I slowly reached out and wrapped my fingers around the stem of his wineglass. Trevor looked momentarily confused, assuming I was taking the drink for myself to calm down, just as he had suggested. He let go of the glass. I held it steadily between us. The backyard went completely silent. Even the music playing from the outdoor speakers seemed to fade into the background. My mother stopped flipping the burnt chicken. Chloe lowered her porcelain plate. I did not break eye contact with Trevor. I maintained a blank, emotionless stare as I tilted the crystal glass forward. The dark vintage red wine poured out in a thick, steady stream. It splashed directly onto the center of his imported Italian leather loafers, soaking instantly into the expensive material and splattering across the pristine concrete patio. Trevor gasped, jumping backward awkwardly, but it was far too late. The dark red stains covered his shoes and the cuffs of his tailored pants. He stared down at his ruined outfit, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "Are you out of your mind?" Trevor shouted, his fake calm demeanor vanishing in a split second. "These shoes cost more than your car." My mother shrieked, dropping her tongs, clattering onto the grill. "Maya, what is wrong with you? You apologize to him right now." My father finally stood up, pointing a finger at me. "You have lost your mind, girl. You come into our yard and disrespect your brother-in-law over an old piece of wood." I pressed the empty glass against Trevor's chest until his shaking hands took it. I locked eyes with my parents. The panic in their expressions was pathetic. They thought a ruined pair of shoes was the extent of my retaliation. I took a deliberate step back, smoothing the front of my blouse. A cold, calculated smile formed on my lips, causing my mother to take a nervous step backward. "Keep the money," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent patio, completely devoid of any anger or hysteria. "Every single cent of it. You are going to need it to pay for the lawyers." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked away. The sound of my sensible heels clicking against their expensive driveway was the only noise cutting through their stunned silence. As I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, I could hear Trevor start to yell again, his voice pitching up in frantic outrage while my father tried to calm him down. I glanced in the rearview mirror before pulling out of the driveway. Chloe was rolling her eyes, clearly telling her frustrated husband that I was just throwing an empty tantrum. They thought the angry sister had stormed off to cry in her car and would eventually get over it just like she always did. They had absolutely no idea that I was not driving home to cry. I was driving home to destroy their entire lives. The drive home was a blur of calculated breathing. When I pushed open my front door, the silence of the house hit me immediately. Instead, I found my 8-year-old son curled up on the living room rug, staring at the empty space where his great-grandfather Gift used to sit. His small shoulders were shaking. I knelt beside him and pulled him into my chest tightly, holding on to him as he cried into my shoulder. I did not tell him to stop crying. I let him feel the loss because what my parents did was a violation of his safe space. "Mom, they took it?" Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "Why did Grandma and Grandpa take my piano?" "They made a very bad choice, baby," I told him, keeping my voice steady and completely devoid of the rage simmering underneath. "But I promise you I am going to get it back, and I am going to make sure they can never take anything from us, ever again." He looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "Are you going to call the police?" I wiped his face and shook my head. "No, Leo. If I call the cops for petty theft, my parents will just bail Trevor out and paint me as the crazy sister who overreacted. We are going to do this my way." I tucked Leo into bed with a cup of warm milk and his favorite book. Once his breathing deepened into a steady rhythm, I walked down the hall to my home office. I locked the door behind me. I sat down at my desk and opened my encrypted work laptop. I am a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest corporate auditing firms in the country. I spend 50 to 60 hours a week untangling complex webs of offshore shell companies, embezzlement schemes, and wire fraud for Fortune 500 executives. Tracking down a suburban tech bro was going to be child play. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up specialized tracking software. While the search algorithms ran, I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and let out a long breath. My family had always treated my career like a boring, tedious punchline. They worshipped the illusion of wealth rather than the reality of hard work. Growing up, I was the scapegoat because I refused to play their game. When it was time for college, I chose a solid state school on a full academic scholarship. I wanted to graduate with zero debt and a secure future. My parents called me unambitious and cheap. Chloe, on the other hand, demanded to go to a private out-of-state university that cost $80,000 a year. She partied her way to a useless degree while my parents took out a second mortgage. They praised her for being bougie and sophisticated. I was just Maya, the boring numbers girl who did not know how to live. When Chloe married Trevor, my parents acted like she had secured a spot in the royal family. Trevor drove a leased Porsche and threw around buzzwords about blockchain and venture capital. He was the perfect golden son-in-law for parents who cared more about country club appearances than actual bank balances. They had spent their entire lives living beyond their means to keep up a fake high society image. Now they crossed the line from pathetic to criminal, using my son to do it. My screen pinged, signaling a match. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the data scrolling rapidly down the monitor. Trevor thought he was clever by forcing my parents to sell the piano for cash and wire the money through a secondary account, but he left a digital trail a mile wide. I tapped into the public ledger associated with his primary cryptocurrency wallet. He loved bragging about his crypto investments at Thanksgiving, so finding his public key took exactly 4 minutes. The numbers told a story that completely destroyed the lie my parents had happily swallowed. I traced the exact amount of $89,000. Trevor claimed the money was going to a luxury contractor to build a custom home theater for his toddler. I pulled up the transaction history for the past 48 hours. There was absolutely zero outgoing money to any construction firm. The $89,000 had bypassed traditional banking entirely. It was funneled directly into a massive volatile cryptocurrency exchange. My eyes darted across the screen, analyzing the timestamp and the receiving address. I cross-referenced the exchange data with the current market charts for the specific digital coin Trevor had dumped the money into. The picture became crystal clear, and it was absolutely pathetic. Trevor was not investing in a home theater. He was not a successful venture capitalist building an empire. The digital coin he had heavily invested his life savings into completely crashed over the weekend, losing 90% of its value. The platform had issued an immediate margin call on his over-leveraged account. If he did not deposit a massive influx of cash by Monday morning, the exchange was going to liquidate everything he owned and sue him for the negative balance. The $89,000 from my son piano did not go toward buying leather recliners. It went directly into a black hole of digital debt just to keep Trevor out of federal bankruptcy court for a few more days. Trevor was secretly broke. He was drowning in massive financial ruin and manipulated my parents into becoming active accomplices in grand larceny to save his skin. A cold, ruthless smile spread across my face as I stared at the glowing screen. Trevor thought he could steal from my son and hide behind his white privilege and my parents' blind favoritism. He was about to lose everything he claimed to have built. He had no idea I now held the digital execution order to his entire fake life. The blue light of my laptop illuminated the dark home office as I stared at the undeniable proof of Trevor's financial collapse. My parents had not just sold a piano. They had fenced a priceless family heirloom to bail out a fraud. The entire home theater story was a pathetic fabricated cover to hide the fact that their golden son-in-law was drowning in crypto debt. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sheer audacity of their betrayal wash over me. For years they had paraded Trevor around country club dinners and holiday gatherings, praising his supposed business acumen while dismissing my corporate accounting career as tedious desk work. Now they were liquidating my son's legacy to prevent their precious daughter from losing her suburban mansion. I quickly downloaded the entire transaction history from the public ledger, encrypting the files into a secure external drive. I had the smoking gun. The digital trail was undeniable, and Trevor was too arrogant to cover his tracks properly. My phone vibrated violently against the wooden desk, breaking the silence of the room. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. She never called me on a Sunday night, unless she needed something. I let it ring twice before tapping the answer button, putting her on speakerphone. Maya's sweetheart Brenda voice dripped with a sickly sweet tone that made my stomach turn. "I am so glad you answered. Listen, I know you were a little upset earlier today, but we really need to move past this." I stared at the blinking green light on my laptop. A little upset, I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "You broke into my house and stole from your own grandson, Brenda." "Do not use that tone with me, Maya." My mother sighed, a familiar sound of manufactured exhaustion she always used to play the victim. "You are blowing this completely out of proportion." The piano was just taking up space. You know, Chloe and Trevor are building that beautiful home theater for little Brayden, and family has to support family. Speaking of which, the private collector who bought the piano needs a simple transfer of ownership form signed. It is just a formality, since your name was technically on the original delivery paperwork when Grandpa Marcus sent it over. I am going to email it to you now. Just sign it and send it right back so the buyer can finalize the insurance. She wanted me to legally sign away the theft. She wanted me to put my signature on a document that would absolve them of grand larceny and legitimize Trevor's fraudulent sale. I am not signing anything, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Maya, stop being difficult. Brenda snapped, the sweet facade instantly melting away to reveal the bitter, demanding woman underneath. The deal is already done. The money is in Trevor's account. You are just trying to sabotage your sister's happiness because you are jealous of what she has. Just sign the paper. What exactly does she have, Mom? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Does she have a successful husband building a home theater? Or does she have a broke fraudster who just lost $89,000 covering a margin call on a collapsed cryptocurrency? Dead silence echoed through the phone. I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath. I know exactly where that money went. I continued, my tone dropping to ice. I tracked the digital wallet. Trevor is bankrupt. He manipulated you and Dad into fencing stolen property to save his own skin. And instead of protecting your grandson, you chose to enable a criminal just so Chloe could keep pretending she is wealthy. You do not know what you are talking about, Brenda stammered, panic bleeding into her voice. Trevor is doing fine. He just had a temporary cash flow issue with some investments. You are making up lies because you are spiteful. You will sign that paper, Maya, or I swear I will make you regret it. You are in no position to make threats, I replied, opening another tab on my computer. In fact, I think it is time we discuss the joint emergency credit card. The line went terrifyingly quiet. 5 years ago, when my father had his heart surgery, I opened a high-limit credit card in my name and gave my mother access strictly for medical emergencies and necessary prescriptions. I paid the bill every month without question. But over the last year, I had noticed a subtle shift in the charges. A high-end spa treatment here. A designer boutique purchase there. Small enough to fly under the radar, but frequent enough to establish a pattern. When I audited the statements alongside Chloe's social media posts, the truth was glaringly obvious. My mother was using my emergency medical funds to buy Chloe luxury handbags and designer shoes to maintain her fake socialite aesthetic. I checked the account balance 10 minutes ago, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. You tried to charge a $4,000 Chanel bag this morning. I am assuming that was a consolation prize for Chloe to deal with her husband's financial stress. Maya. That was an accident, Brenda blurted out, her voice trembling. I used the wrong card. It is funny how those accidents only happen at luxury department stores, I replied. But you do not need to worry about making that mistake again. I froze the account. The card is dead and I am removing you as an authorized user permanently. You cannot do that. Brenda screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. We need that card for emergencies. You are cutting off your own parents. You are a monster, Maya. A cold, heartless monster. I am an accountant, I corrected smoothly. And I do not finance thieves. Tell Trevor he has 24 hours to return my son piano before I go to the authorities with the blockchain evidence. You arrogant, ungrateful brat, Brenda shrieked, her breathing ragged. You think you can threaten us. You think you are so perfect sitting in your big office while your family struggles. If you do not sign that transfer paper and turn that credit card back on right now, I will call Child Protective Services. I paused, my finger hovering over the end call button. Excuse me. You heard me, Brenda sneered, a venomous edge taking over her panic. You are a single mother who travels for work constantly. You leave Leo with babysitters all the time. I will tell them you abandon him. I will tell them you are unstable and unfit. I will have that boy taken away from you before the week is over. Do not test me, Maya. I will destroy you to protect my family. She was willing to weaponize the foster care system and traumatize her own grandson just to protect Chloe's fake wealth. I did not yell back. I did not beg her to stop. I simply smiled, a slow, dark smile in the empty room. Go ahead and call them, Mom, I said softly. I will leave the front door unlocked for them. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the desk. The trap was set, and she had just walked right into it. The metallic clatter of my phone hitting the mahogany desk echoed in the silent office. Brenda was not bluffing. My mother possessed a vindictive streak that ran bone deep, and she had just been backed into a corner. Exposing her precious golden son-in-law as a fraudulent failure and cutting off her supply of designer handbags was the ultimate declaration of war. I knew exactly how her twisted mind worked. She would call Child Protective Services with a fabricated story about me neglecting Leo, just to force my compliance. She would weaponize the state against her own grandson to protect her fragile upper-class illusion. I needed heavy artillery, and I needed it right now. I picked my phone back up and dialed the one person in this family who operated entirely outside of my parents' toxic sphere of influence. Great-Grandpa Marcus. At 75 years old, Marcus was a force of nature. He was a self-made millionaire who built a commercial supply chain from the ground up, starting with a single delivery truck. Unlike my parents who leveraged every cent of credit to look rich, Marcus lived modestly in a comfortable but unassuming ranch house. His wealth was real, tangible, and quietly immense. He was also the man who had specifically purchased that antique 1920s Steinway piano for Leo after hearing my son play at a school recital. Marcus recognized Leo's genuine prodigy-level talent and wanted to nurture it. The line rang exactly twice before his gruff, familiar voice answered. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the bare facts: the break-in, the missing piano, Trevor $89,000 crypto margin call, and finally, Brenda unhinged threat to call CPS on me. Marcus did not interrupt. He did not gasp or ask me if I was exaggerating. When I finished speaking, there was a heavy silence on the line. I am on my way, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Do not sign anything and do not open your door until I get there. I spent the next 45 minutes organizing my digital files. I exported Trevor blockchain transaction history, the margin call data, and the forged transfer of ownership document my mother had emailed me. I placed everything into a clean presentation folder on my desktop. I needed the evidence to be absolutely bulletproof. My entire life, my parents had treated my accounting degree like a blue-collar trade. They mocked me for choosing a state university and graduating debt-free, while they praised Chloe for acquiring $80,000 in student loans for a liberal arts degree she never used. They worshipped the bougie aesthetic of success while completely ignoring the grueling hard work required to actually achieve it. They thought my job was just crunching numbers in a cubicle. They failed to realize that as a top-tier corporate forensic accountant, I tracked missing millions for ruthless executives. Dismantling Trevor amateur financial fraud was like taking candy from a particularly stupid baby. Exactly 52 minutes later, a heavy knock sounded at my front door. I checked the security camera. Marcus stood on my porch, but he was not alone. Beside him stood Arthur Sterling, a ruthless corporate attorney who had managed Marcus' business empire for 3 decades. Arthur was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who dismantled hostile takeovers for breakfast. The fact that Marcus brought him meant this was no longer a family dispute. This was a legal execution. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Marcus stepped inside, his jaw set in a hard, rigid line. He wore his usual faded denim jacket and work boots, looking entirely unlike the multimillionaire he actually was. He pulled me into a brief, tight hug. The familiar scent of peppermint and old leather grounded me instantly. Where is my great-grandson? Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the hallway. He is asleep, I replied, keeping my voice hushed. He cried himself to sleep after he saw the empty space in the living room. I watched a muscle feather in Marcus' jaw. He turned to his attorney. Arthur, I want you to see the evidence. Maya, show us everything. I led them into my home office and woke up my computer monitors. The glowing screens illuminated the dark room as I pulled up the encrypted files. I walked them through the timeline with forensic precision. I started with the forced entry at my patio doors. Then I showed them the email from Brenda demanding my signature on a fraudulent transfer of ownership to a private collector. Finally, I brought up the masterpiece. The public ledger of Trevor cryptocurrency wallet. Look right here, I said, pointing a pen at the highlighted transaction row. Trevor liquidated the piano for $89,000 cash. He did not hire a luxury contractor to build a custom home theater for Chloe Toddler. That was a pathetic cover story designed to hide his absolute financial ruin from his country club friends. 2 days ago, the digital coin he heavily invested in crashed. The exchange hit him with a massive margin call. He wired the exact amount from the piano sale directly into this offshore crypto exchange just to keep his account from being liquidated and facing federal bankruptcy charges. Arthur leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes narrowing behind his wire-rimmed glasses as he read the transaction hashes and the timestamps. He adjusted his glasses and let out a low, sharp whistle. This is grand larceny wire fraud and potentially conspiracy if your parents knowingly facilitated the sale to cover his existing debts. He looked at Marcus. We have enough to bury him, Marcus. Marcus did not say a single word at first. He just stared at the glowing screen, his weathered hands gripping the edge of my mahogany desk so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. The feeling of betrayal radiating from him was a physical presence in the room. He had given that priceless piano to Leo out of pure love, and his own son had stolen it to bail out a con artist. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was startlingly quiet, but it carried a heavy weight that made the air in the room feel suffocating. They think they can get away with this because they think we are weak. He turned to look at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire. Your father Calvin has always been a coward. He hides behind your mother's arrogance and pretends his hands are perfectly clean. Marcus took a slow, ragged breath, squaring his broad shoulders. Your father tricked me into mortgaging my first house to pay off his debts 30 years ago. I bailed him out because he was my son, and I spent a decade working double shifts to recover from his mess. I swore I would never let him drag this family down again. I will not let them steal from my great-grandson. Before I could even process the massive family secret Marcus had just dropped, a sharp, aggressive ringing shattered the silence. We all froze in place. The doorbell chimed again, followed by heavy, authoritative knocking on the front door. I glanced at the live security camera feed on my secondary monitor. 2 women stood on my front porch holding clipboards and wearing official state identification badges on lanyards around their necks. Brenda had not been bluffing. She had actually made the call. It is Child Protective Services, I whispered, staring at the high-definition screen. Arthur straightened his silk tie and calmly buttoned his tailored suit jacket, a predatory gleam flashing brightly in his eyes. Perfect. Arthur said, a grim, terrifying smile forming on his face. Let us go introduce ourselves. Arthur swung the front door wide open. He did not greet them with typical panic. Instead, he offered a polite, predatory smile and extended a crisp business card. I am Arthur Sterling, legal counsel for the homeowner, he said. Please come inside. The 2 CPS investigators exchanged a bewildered glance, stepping over the threshold. The lead worker, a stern woman, introduced herself as Agent Miller. Her partner Davis lingered behind her. We received an anonymous tip regarding the welfare of a minor at this residence, Agent Miller stated, trying to regain control. The caller alleged severe neglect, abandonment, and unsafe living conditions. We need to speak with Maya and see the child immediately. I stepped out from the hallway. I am Maya, I said calmly, and my son is right in here. I led them into the main living room. If Agent Miller expected to find a squalid, dangerous environment, her face betrayed her immediate disappointment. My home was immaculate. The hardwood floors gleamed and the space was brightly lit. In the corner, Leo was happily perched on a plush stool, playing a high-end electronic Yamaha keyboard. Marcus had quietly ordered it delivered the moment he heard about the theft. Leo paused his playing and looked up, offering the strangers a bright, gap-toothed smile before turning his attention to his great-grandfather. Marcus was sitting comfortably in a leather armchair, sipping black coffee, looking like the ultimate picture of familial stability. Agent Miller cleared her throat, clearly thrown off balance. The caller stated that you travel constantly for business and leave your son unattended for days. The report also claimed you were suffering from severe financial instability, making you an unfit parent. Arthur moved to the coffee table and unclasped his leather briefcase. He began laying out documents with the swift, lethal precision of a blackjack dealer. "What you have received is a maliciously fabricated report," Arthur stated. "Here are the travel logs from Maya employer, a top-tier accounting firm. She has not traveled outside the state in over 6 months. When she does travel, she utilizes a fully licensed, bonded, and vetted professional nanny service. Here are their invoices and background checks confirming her impeccable parenting." Agent Miller blinked, picking up the papers. "But the financial instability—" Arthur cut her off, sliding a second folder forward. "Maya is a senior forensic accountant. Here are her redacted bank statements and a summary of her net worth. Her financial stability is absolute." Davis looked at the documents and then at the pristine living room. "Miller, this looks like a retaliatory call." Arthur smiled. "It is exactly that, Mr. Davis. My client recently uncovered a massive financial fraud committed by her brother-in-law. The anonymous caller is Maya Mother Brenda, who is actively attempting to extort my client into ignoring the theft of an $89,000 antique piano stolen from this very room yesterday. We are currently preparing to file a police report and subsequent civil litigation." Agent Miller lowered her clipboard, her strict demeanor evaporating into profound professional embarrassment. The child was well-fed, clean, completely at ease, and surrounded by loving family. "Miss Maya," Agent Miller said, her tone shifting to genuine apology, "I am so sorry for this intrusion. We are required by law to investigate every claim. It is abundantly clear that your son is in a safe and thriving environment." "I appreciate you doing your job, Agent Miller," I replied. "It is unfortunate that certain people weaponize your agency for personal vendettas." "We will be closing this case immediately," Davis added hastily, eager to exit the tense atmosphere Arthur had created. "We will note in the file that the tip was malicious." Arthur handed them another business card. "If your supervisors require any further documentation, you have my direct line." The investigators practically ran out the front door, eager to escape the heavy legal pressure bearing down on them. The moment the door clicked shut, Marcus let out a low rumble of a laugh. "I always enjoy watching you work," Arthur Marcus said, taking another sip of his coffee. "You never let them breathe." Arthur snapped his briefcase shut. Brenda made a massive tactical error, weaponizing a state agency. It establishes a documented pattern of harassment that we can use against them in court when we drop the hammer. I walked back into my office, needing to check the live blockchain ledgers to see if Trevor had made any desperate moves. But as I opened my laptop, a push notification popped up in the corner of my screen. It was an alert from Chloe account. Chloe was broadcasting a live video. I clicked on the notification and the screen expanded. The video showed Chloe standing in her sprawling suburban backyard, holding a glass of expensive champagne. She was wearing a designer silk dress, the exact kind funded by my emergency medical credit card. Behind her, the patio was packed with her elite sorority sisters, Trevor wealthy venture capital friends, and my parents. "Welcome everyone to our exclusive Sip and See." Chloe giggled into the camera, tossing her perfectly styled hair. "Trevor and I are just so blessed, and we wanted to gather our inner circle to celebrate the groundbreaking of our brand new custom home theater. It is a massive project, and we are just so thankful for the continuous abundance in our lives." The camera panned to Trevor, who was holding court by the outdoor bar. He was laughing loudly, projecting the image of a wildly successful tech investor without a care in the world. He was literally partying on the edge of a financial cliff, pretending he could fly. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute clarity wash over me. They were throwing a party to celebrate money they had stolen from my son. I looked at Marcus and let a sharp smile cross my face. "Shall we crash a party?" I asked him now. The heavy oak doors of Marcus' town car closed with a solid, reassuring thud, insulating us from the suburban noise. Arthur had stayed behind at my house to draft the civil litigation and coordinate with the local police precinct. It was just Marcus and me riding in complete silence as the driver navigated toward Chloe's sprawling faux Tuscan estate. The neighborhood was a monument to superficial wealth. Massive houses pressed far too close together on tiny lots, perfectly manicured lawns, hiding mountains of suffocating debt. Cars lined the street for 2 blocks in every direction. BMWs, Audis, and pristine Range Rovers blocked the fire hydrants and crowded the sidewalks. Chloe had clearly invited everyone she perceived to be of value. Her entire social climbing sorority alumni chapter was here, along with Trevor's supposed venture capital colleagues. I could hear the obnoxious thumping bass of a hired DJ playing awful tropical house music long before we even reached the end of the driveway. We did not bother knocking. The massive wrought iron front doors were propped wide open to let the crisp evening air circulate. A hired bartender stood in the foyer pouring Prosecco into cheap plastic flutes masquerading as crystal. I walked straight past him, Marcus a half-step behind me, his heavy wooden cane striking the Italian tile with a rhythmic, menacing thud. The main living area was packed with people laughing loudly and holding tiny plates of catered appetizers. I scanned the room, taking in the sheer absurdity of the spectacle. Chloe was standing near the back patio holding court with a group of women in matching pastel sundresses. She was waving her hands frantically, gesturing toward the newly renovated space that was the supposed centerpiece of this entire event. I glanced into the adjacent room. The highly publicized custom home theater that Trevor had supposedly spent a fortune on was a complete joke. It was not a tiered acoustic wonderland. It was a dark, painted room with a standard 85-inch flat screen bolted to the drywall and 6 black leather recliners that still had the promotional financing tags tucked underneath the footrests. They had stolen my son's antique piano, fenced it to a private collector, and funneled the cash into a failing crypto margin call, all while using a big box store television on a payment plan as their alibi. The sheer pathetic nature of the lie made my blood run cold. The DJ transitioned to another song, and the momentary dip in the music made the rhythmic tapping of Marcus Kane suddenly amplify. Thud, thud, thud. A tech bro in a tight polo shirt turned around, his smile dropping instantly. He nudged the woman next to him. Like a ripple effect, the laughter began to die out. Conversations sputtered and stopped. Heads turned. Within 20 seconds, the entire open-concept living space went completely dead silent. The only sound was the awful tropical house music playing softly from the hidden speakers. Chloe noticed the sudden quiet and turned around. Her eyes locked onto me, and the color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. She looked at me, then looked at the formidable scowling figure of Marcus standing right beside me. Absolute panic flared in her eyes, but she possessed the terrifying ability to instantly manufacture a socialite facade. She forced a bright, strained smile onto her lips and practically sprinted across the room, her high heels clicking frantically against the tile. "Maya," she hissed, keeping her voice pitched low enough that the nearby guests could not hear the venom. "What are you doing here?" "I just came to see the new theater, Chloe," I replied, my voice completely level, carrying easily across the silent room. "I wanted to see what $89,000 buys these days." Chloe grabbed my forearm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging sharply into my skin. She tried to physically block my path, angling her body to shield us from the stares of her wealthy friends. Her fake smile never wavered, even as her eyes burned with frantic rage. "You cannot be here, Maya," she whispered through gritted teeth, her breath smelling of cheap Prosecco and sheer terror. "This is a private catered event for our professional network. You need to leave right now before you embarrass yourself and ruin my night." She attempted to shove me backward toward the foyer. I did not move an inch. I just stared down at the hand gripping my arm. "Let go of my granddaughter," Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed the gravelly, authoritative resonance of a man who commanded boardrooms and dismantled executives for a living. Chloe snatched her hand back as if she had been burned, physically recoiling from the sheer force of his presence. She stammered, taking a full step backward, her fake smile finally shattering into a look of unadulterated fear. "Grandpa Marcus," she choked out, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "We did not know you were coming. We would have sent a car." Marcus ignored her entirely. He did not even look at her face. He stepped past her, his broad shoulders parting the sea of silent, staring guests like a heavy ship cutting through water. His cane tapped loudly against the hardwood floor, echoing through the suffocating tension of the room. He stopped dead in the center of the living area, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd of terrified socialites and sweating business partners until he found exactly who he was looking for. "I didn't realize my grandson was catering parties with stolen property," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the sudden, terrifying silence. "Where is Calvin?" The crowd parted instantly, revealing my father standing near the patio doors, his face pale and sweating, clutching a glass of scotch like a lifeline. Calvin pushed himself away from the glass patio door. His knuckles were white around his crystal tumbler, but he quickly forced his features into a mask of patriarchal authority. He set his drink down on a nearby bistro table and marched across the room. He bypassed me entirely and aimed straight for Marcus. He plastered on that familiar country club smile, the one he used to charm bank loan officers and ignorant investors. He reached out to grasp the older man by the shoulder, attempting to steer him toward the hallway leading to the guest suites. "Let us step into the study, Marcus," Calvin said, his voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "This is not the place for family business. We have a catered spread out back and a wonderful string quartet playing. You must be exhausted from the drive over." Marcus did not budge. He planted his cane firmly on the floor and stared at Calvin with absolute disgust. "Do not touch me, Calvin," Marcus growled. "And do not patronize me. I asked you a direct question about my great-grandson and his property. I expect a direct answer right now." Calvin dropped his hand, his fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. He turned his attention to me, his expression instantly morphing from accommodating host to deeply concerned father. "Maya, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Calvin asked, his tone perfectly modulated to sound like a man dealing with a hysterical child. He looked around at the silent staring guests, offering them an apologetic shrug. "I am so sorry, everyone," Calvin announced, projecting his voice to reach the back of the room. "My daughter has been under immense stress lately. She has been struggling with severe mental instability since her divorce. She has these episodes where she gets confused and lashes out. She is causing a scene over some old furniture we kindly moved out of her house to clean up her living space. It is a private medical matter, and we are getting her the psychiatric help she desperately needs." A collective murmur of sympathetic understanding rippled through the crowd of elite guests. A few women in pastel dresses shot me looks of deep pity. Chloe stood a few feet away, nodding along with fake tears shining in her eyes, playing the role of the supportive sister perfectly. Trevor stood behind her, looking remarkably relieved that Calvin had stepped up to defuse the bomb. They thought they had won. They thought their synchronized gaslighting routine would discredit me entirely and protect their precious social standing from any further damage. I did not scream, I did not cry or act like the unstable woman Calvin desperately wanted the crowd to see. Instead, I unclasped my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of high-quality color-printed financial documents. The sharp snap of the metal clasp echoed loudly, cutting through the sympathetic murmurs. I held the heavy stack of paper in my left hand, feeling the solid weight of undeniable truth. "If you think a 19th century Steinway grand piano is just old furniture, then you are an even worse businessman than I thought, Calvin," I said smoothly, my voice carrying absolute authority. "And if you think you can cover up a federal crime by calling me crazy, you are completely out of your mind." I turned my attention away from my father and scanned the crowd of wealthy attendees looking for a specific face. I knew Trevor's entire client roster because I had audited his public-facing investment firm out of sheer curiosity 6 months ago. I spotted him standing near the kitchen island. Richard Sterling, no relation to Arthur, but a man who managed a massive hedge fund downtown. He was Trevor's primary source of venture capital. He was wearing a tailored navy suit and watching the drama unfold with calculating hawk-like eyes. I walked directly toward him. The guests parted like the Red Sea, stepping back to avoid my path. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, attempting to lunge forward, but Marcus slammed his cane down, blocking her advance. I stopped right in front of the hedge fund manager and handed him the top 3 pages from my stack of documents. He took them hesitantly, his brow furrowed in confusion before he looked down at the highlighted text. These are the blockchain transaction hashes and the margin call notices from a collapsed offshore cryptocurrency exchange, I told him, keeping my voice steady and professional. As a seasoned investor, I am sure you can read a digital ledger. The man adjusted his reading glasses and scanned the documents. His eyes widened significantly as he processed the undeniable evidence of financial ruin. The numbers printed in bold red ink told a story of absolute disaster. The silence in the room grew even heavier, thick with impending doom. Trevor's face drained of all color, matching the white paint on the living room walls. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, waiting for the floor to drop beneath his feet. Calvin took a step forward, his hands shaking wildly, but he had absolutely no words left to defend his golden son-in-law. Their illusion was fracturing right before them. The facade was finally breaking apart piece by piece as the elite crowd realized they were standing in a house built entirely on lies. I slowly turned to face the outdoor bar where my brother-in-law was frozen in sheer terror. I took a deep breath, letting the reality of the moment settle over the sprawling room. Everyone was watching him now, waiting for a reaction, waiting for a denial that would never come. Trevor, did you tell your investors that you used $89,000 of stolen family assets to cover your margin calls yesterday? I asked, my voice ringing out with crystal clear precision. Because the blockchain ledger right here says that you are completely and utterly insolvent. The sharp crash of shattering crystal broke the absolute silence of the room. Trevor had dropped his champagne flute. The expensive liquid pooled over the pristine Italian tile, soaking into the cuffs of his designer linen trousers. He did not even look down. His eyes were wide, unblinking pools of pure animal panic locked onto the documents in Richard's sterling hands. The suave, condescending alpha male persona he had spent years perfecting evaporated into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, hollow shell of a man. Richard adjusted his reading glasses, his sharp eyes scanning the printed blockchain ledger. A muscle in his jaw twitched as the reality of the numbers set in. The offshore account, the $89,000 transfer, the catastrophic margin call. Richard was not just an investor, he was the lead anchor for Trevor's entire venture capital fund. If Richard pulled his backing, the rest of the dominoes would instantly fall. And Richard was currently staring at absolute proof that his fund manager was a degenerate gambler throwing stolen money into a black hole. Is this true? Richard asked, his voice deathly quiet, but carrying the force of a hurricane. Did you leverage our capital against this garbage offshore crypto exchange, Trevor? Trevor swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly. Richard, listen, you have to understand, he stammered, taking a shaky step forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. It was a temporary liquidity issue, a bridge loan. The market just took an unexpected dip. But I have the analytics right here. I am going to make it all back by the end of the fiscal quarter. I just needed a small capital injection to keep the positions open. A small capital injection, Richard repeated, his tone laced with absolute venom. You fenced stolen family property to cover a margin call on a meme coin, Trevor. You lied on your quarterly disclosures. You lied on your risk assessment forms. A low, angry murmur rippled through the crowd. Other investors in the room, men and women wearing incredibly expensive designer watches and holding tiny catered appetizers, suddenly realized with absolute sickening clarity that their massive financial portfolios were actually being managed by a desperate, completely incompetent fraudster. A man in a gray suit near the back patio stepped forward, his face flushed red with fury. You told me my seed money was locked into secure municipal bonds, Trevor, the man shouted. Are you telling me my children's college funds are sitting in a liquidated crypto wallet right now? No. Trevor practically shrieked, his voice cracking under the pressure. It is secure. Everything is fine. Maya is just a bitter, jealous accountant making up numbers because she hates Chloe. She photoshopped these ledgers to ruin my reputation. Richard Sterling crumpled the printout in his fist. Do not insult my intelligence, Trevor. I can verify these transaction hashes on my phone right now. You are done. I am pulling my entire fund out immediately, and I am personally calling the SEC first thing in the morning to report your firm." The room erupted into total chaos. Investors started shouting, demanding their money back. Chloe burst into hysterical manufactured tears, sinking onto one of the unpaid leather recliners and sobbing dramatically into her hands. Calvin stood frozen, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the social and financial destruction happening in his living room. But Brenda never surrendered. My mother operated on pure ego and narcissistic rage, and she was not about to let her golden child lose her country club status without a vicious fight. Brenda shoved her way through the angry crowd of investors, stepping squarely in front of Trevor, like a lioness protecting a mangy cub. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her chest heaving with furious, indignant breath. "Stop this right now!" Brenda shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing over the angry shouts. "How dare you, Maya? How dare you come into your sister home and do this to her? It is just money. It is just a temporary setback. Family protects family. Trevor is a brilliant businessman, and he is going to make it all back tenfold. You are just a miserable single mother trying to drag everyone down to your pathetic level." I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her defense hang in the air. "You stole my son's inheritance, Brenda. You broke into my house." "It was old wood!" Brenda screamed back, her face turning a blotchy purple. "It was taking up space in your cramped little house while Trevor is out here building an empire for our family. You were not even using it. And it was ours to sell anyway. We are the heads of this family. Grandpa Marcus gave that piano to this family. We simply reallocated the asset to where it was needed most. You are a selfish, ungrateful brat for making a public spectacle out of a simple family decision." The crowd of wealthy guests stared at my mother in absolute horror. Even the furious investors were temporarily stunned into silence by her unhinged justification of grand larceny. She had just publicly confessed to the theft right in front of 20 witnesses while trying to claim the moral high ground. She actually believed she was completely untouchable. That was when Marcus stepped forward. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his wooden cane striking the floor with rhythmic finality. He did not yell. He did not match Brenda's hysterical, shrieking energy. He simply stood there, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying authority that immediately suffocated the remaining noise in the room. He looked at my mother, his dark eyes burning with a cold, quiet fury that made her instantly falter. Her self-righteous posture crumbled under his unwavering glare, and she instinctively took a step backward, bumping into Trevor. Marcus slowly adjusted his firm, tight grip on his polished wooden cane. "Who told you that piano belonged to me?" Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Calvin, pleading for him to fix the mess she had exacerbated. Calvin straightened his tailored jacket, clearing his throat, attempting to project the authority that always worked on his submissive family. "Well, Marcus," Calvin began, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence. "As the head of this family, I assumed any antique furniture passed down fell under my purview. Maya was keeping it in a cramped living room, simply gathering dust. We liquidated an unused asset to support a thriving family business. It was a practical financial decision." "A practical financial decision," Marcus repeated, rolling the words off his tongue with dangerous precision. "You ignorant, arrogant fool. You look at a true masterpiece and see nothing but firewood because your mind is completely vacant of anything resembling culture or respect. You honestly think because you bully your wife, you hold absolute dominion over the world." Calvin bristled, his face flushing angry crimson. "Now listen here, Marcus. I will not be spoken to like some petulant child in my own daughter house. That piano was taking up precious space. It was just a hunk of old wood and rusted strings. It was a custom 1920s Steinway grand piano." Marcus countered, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling, forcing Calvin to snap his mouth shut. "It was commissioned specifically for the Cotton Club. It was played by Duke Ellington and Count Basie during the height of the Harlem Renaissance. The ivory keys you casually pawned off have absorbed the sweat and soul of musical geniuses who actively shaped the fabric of American culture. It survived an entire century, carefully preserved and meticulously restored. And you fenced it to cover a margin call on a fake digital currency. Brenda tried to recover her footing, her voice trembling as she stubbornly clung to her original narrative. Well, if it was so incredibly valuable, why on earth did you leave it in Maya tiny house? She works from home now. She cannot afford to properly maintain a priceless antique like that. You should have given it to Chloe. Chloe has the space for it here in this beautiful estate. She could have hosted elegant charity recitals. I did not leave it in Maya house, Brenda Marcus said, his gaze shifting to my mother with an expression of utter pity. And I certainly did not give it to Chloe. In fact, I never personally owned the piano at all. The entire room went completely still. The silence was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the smart refrigerator in the gourmet kitchen. Trevor let out a strange, strangled whimpering noise from the back of his throat. He looked frantically between Marcus and me, his eyes darting back and forth as his panicked brain struggled to process the terrifying new variable that had just been introduced into the equation. If you do not own it, Calvin asked, his voice suddenly dropping an octave, pitching into the realm of genuine primal fear. Then who exactly does? I sit on the board of directors for the National Heritage Foundation. Marcus explained, his tone shifting into the crisp, brutal cadence of a corporate litigator delivering a fatal blow. We are a federally backed organization strictly dedicated to preserving historically significant artifacts of American culture. We actively acquire, restore, and protect these treasures from greedy, uncultured vultures exactly like you. Marcus turned his gaze toward me for a brief moment, a flicker of genuine warmth breaking through his icy demeanor before he locked his eyes back onto my sweating father. The Foundation does not just lock these priceless instruments away in cold, dark underground vaults. We believe they desperately need to be played. We have a highly competitive endowment program, a prestigious prodigy grant, specifically designed to place these historical instruments into the hands of exceptional young musicians who show extraordinary promise. He tapped his heavy cane against the Italian tile, letting the sharp sound punctuate his next sentence. We officially loaned that Steinway to Leo, your grandson, my great-grandson, a boy who at 10 years old plays with more raw talent and emotional depth than most senior conservatory instructors. He went through a rigorous audition process spanning 6 agonizing months. The board voted unanimously to award him the Prodigy Grant. That piano was legally placed in Maya home under a strict federal loan agreement solely for Leo artistic development. Chloe let out a sob, grabbing the kitchen island to keep her legs from giving out. Calvin looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his eyes vacant. All his corporate bravado completely vanished, leaving behind a broken old man who realized he had navigated his family into a legal minefield. Trevor finally collapsed against the heavy patio door, sliding slowly down the cold glass pane until he hit the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest, silently rocking back and forth in his ruined linen trousers. The realization of what he had done was physically crushing him. He had not just fenced stolen family goods to a shady local collector. He had unknowingly crossed a massive line that could never be uncrossed. You thought you were so incredibly clever, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register that cut through the silence like a razor blade. You thought you could simply walk into a single-mother house, intimidate her into quiet submission, and strip away her child joy just to fund your pathetic, reckless gambling habit. You assumed there would be absolutely zero consequences because you have spent your entire miserable lives avoiding all accountability. Marcus took one final step forward, closing the remaining distance between himself and the cowering men. He looked dead at Calvin and Trevor, his eyes burning with a righteous and destructive fire. You did not steal from a single mother. You stole a federally protected historical artifact from a registered national foundation. The word federal hung in the air like a live grenade. In the pristine, meticulously decorated open-concept living room, the silence shattered. These were not ordinary people. They were venture capitalists, corporate attorneys, and hedge fund managers. They understood the terrifying difference between a messy family civil dispute and a federal grand larceny investigation. They knew what it meant when the government became involved. They knew that a registered national foundation possessed the legal firepower to freeze corporate assets, subpoena bank records, and initiate FBI inquiries. The realization hit the crowd with the force of a physical blow. Richard Sterling was the first one to move. The hedge fund manager did not say another word to Calvin or Trevor. He simply turned on his expensive Italian leather shoes and marched straight toward the front doors. His departure was the signal everyone else needed. The panic was instantaneous and absolute. Dozens of highly influential socialites and business partners began sprinting for the exit. Crystal champagne flutes were abandoned on the quartz kitchen island. Catered plates of artisanal appetizers were left forgotten on the expensive modern furniture. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near this house when the authorities arrived. Nobody wanted their name associated with Trevor's rapidly collapsing financial empire. Calvin stood entirely paralyzed near the sliding patio doors, watching helplessly as his carefully curated influential social network completely abandoned him without a second thought. He reached out a weak, trembling hand toward a passing banking executive, but the man deliberately avoided his gaze, sidestepping Calvin as if he were carrying a highly contagious, deadly disease. Brenda pressed both of her hands tightly against her cheeks, her face entirely devoid of its normal rosy color. The arrogant sneer she had so proudly weaponized just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by the devastating, horrifying realization that her elite social standing in the upscale community was permanently destroyed. They were going to be the very central, vicious gossip of every single country club in the entire local area. Chloe finally snapped out of her performative weeping. The chaotic sound of her wealthy, important friends fleeing her beloved home acted like a bucket of freezing ice water thrown directly into her face. She spun around rapidly to face her husband, her perfectly contoured features contorted into a dark mask of pure, feral desperation. She violently grabbed the collar of his wrinkled linen shirt, her long, sharp acrylic nails digging deeply into the expensive fabric. She shook him viciously, completely, ignoring the spilled champagne soaking into her expensive designer heels. "Tell me he is lying, Trevor," she screamed, her voice cracking loudly under the immense emotional strain. "Tell me you did not sell a federally protected historical artifact. You told me it was just useless old junk taking up space. You swore to me that Maya had absolutely no legal claim to it, and we could safely use the cash to float the crypto portfolio until the market corrected itself. Tell me you did not just commit a massive federal crime." Trevor could barely even stand on his own 2 feet. He swayed dangerously under his wife's frantic, violent grip, sweating profusely from every single pore on his pale forehead. His face was a sickly grayish shade, and his breathing came in shallow, rapid, desperate gasps. The confident, arrogant venture capitalist who had smugly patronized me at countless family dinners for the past 5 long years was completely gone. He was nothing but a terrified, pathetic, desperate man cornered by his own monumental greed and monumental stupidity. He pulled weakly at Chloe's hands, trying unsuccessfully to loosen her suffocating tight grip on his ruined shirt collar. "It does not matter," Trevor babbled frantically, his voice pitching upward into a high, hysterical, pathetic whine. "Listen to me, Chloe, please. It does not matter. The transaction is already done. The anonymous buyer wired the money this morning, and the margin call is temporarily satisfied. We have some breathing room. We can easily fix this mess. I know a reliable guy downtown who specializes in shady off-market asset recovery. We can just buy it back right now. We will offer them a 20% premium on the original purchase price. Everyone has a number. We will just buy the stupid piano back before the foundation even files the official legal paperwork." I watched him desperately trying to construct a flimsy lifeline out of pure, unadulterated delusion. He truly believed his money and his shady network could instantly erase the catastrophic, immense damage he had just caused. He operated under the incredibly arrogant assumption that every single problem could be quickly solved by throwing enough cash at the right contacts. He had absolutely no idea how deep a hole he had actually dug for himself this time. I walked slowly toward them, the heavy leather portfolio tucked securely under my arm. I did not rush. I took my sweet time, letting my heels click deliberately and rhythmically against the tile floor. You are not buying anything back, Trevor, I said, my voice perfectly calm and easily cutting through his hysterical, rapid rambling. I reached calmly into my portfolio and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. It was not a printed blockchain ledger this time. It was a formal, certified document bearing the official watermark and seal of a major international banking institution. I held it out deliberately, holding it just out of his trembling reach, forcing him to look directly at the undeniable concrete proof of his complete, absolute destruction. You cannot buy it back, Trevor, I said, watching the last remaining drop of hope permanently leave his wide, terrified eyes. You really thought you were outsmarting everyone when you frantically rushed that blind digital sale to an anonymous overseas shell corporation just to get the cash fast? The cold, terrifying reality is far worse than you can possibly begin to comprehend, because you do not even know who you sold it to, do you? Trevor stared at the certified document in my hand, his eyes darting frantically across the black ink. What are you talking about? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I sold it to a private broker in the Cayman Islands, a discreet private buyer, a holding firm. You sold it to a digital ghost. Trevor, I said, taking a deliberate step toward him. You were so desperate to cover your massive crypto losses that you did not even perform basic due diligence. When I first noticed the Steinway was missing from my living room, I knew exactly who had the keys to my house. Arthur helped me monitor the high-value underground auction sites. It only took 48 hours for the piano to surface on a broker listing. You listed it at a fraction of its actual value, just begging for a quick cash buyout. You wanted the money wired immediately, no questions asked. So I gave you exactly what you wanted. I did not just track the money, Trevor. I actively became the money. I established an anonymous offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. I set up a secure encrypted communication channel and contacted your shady broker directly. You accepted my lowball cash offer within 10 minutes. You did not ask for a single reference. You just wanted the wire transfer to clear before your creditors broke your kneecaps. Trevor shook his head wildly, pressing his back flat against the sliding glass door. No, that is impossible, he choked out, rubbing his sweating face with trembling hands. The broker verified the holding firm. The funds cleared. The buyer was a corporate entity. I am the corporate entity, I said, my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any sympathy. I am the private collector you sold it to, Trevor. I used my own corporate funds to buy back my son's stolen piano. I pulled a second document from the leather portfolio. This one featured a copy of a digital contract, which means I have your forged signature on a digital bill of sale, I told him, tapping the paper with my index finger. And I have the official wire transfer proving exactly where the money landed. You bypassed the state lines when you routed the payment through that specific international banking exchange. That instantly elevates your panicked little theft into a massive felony. You committed interstate wire fraud. You engaged in the trafficking of stolen cultural property, and you did it all in writing using your own personal credentials because you thought you were completely untouchable. Chloe let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. She stumbled away from Trevor as if he had suddenly caught fire. Her flawless socialite mask dissolved into utter despair. You absolute idiot, Chloe shrieked, slapping her hands against her designer dress. You ruined us. You ruined my entire life over a stupid margin call. I am going to lose this house. I am going to lose everything. Calvin sank slowly into one of the unpaid leather recliners. He looked physically ill. He grasped the armrest tightly, his knuckles turning white. His patriarchal authority was completely broken. Brenda, however, was still fighting a desperate losing battle against reality. She rushed over to Calvin, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him violently. Do something, Calvin, she demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Call our lawyers. We can fix this. We can pay her off. Maya, name your price. How much do you want to make this go away? We will give you whatever you want. Just drop it. I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of finality. You cannot buy your way out of a federal crime, Brenda, I said calmly. And you cannot buy your way out of the National Heritage Foundation legal department. The piano is already safely secured. Marcus stepped forward. his gravelly voice filled with quiet disgust. You allowed your golden child and her husband to steal from a gifted boy just to maintain your pathetic illusion of wealth. You reached the bitter end. There are no more bailouts. There are no more backroom deals. You are going to face the full, brutal weight of your actions. Trevor slid completely down to the floor, burying his face in his hands. He let out a loud, pathetic wail, rocking back and forth against the glass. Chloe ignored him entirely, frantically typing on her cell phone, likely trying to reach a divorce attorney, before the authorities froze their shared bank accounts. The heavy silence returned to the massive open-concept living room, broken only by Trevor pathetic sobbing. I closed my leather portfolio and handed it to Arthur, who offered me a small approving nod. The operation was complete. Every single piece of evidence was secured, and the federal authorities had already been fully briefed on the situation hours before we even arrived at the estate. I turned toward the open front doors, feeling the cool, crisp night air wash over my face. It felt incredibly refreshing. I took a deep breath, letting the clean oxygen fill my lungs. I had protected my son, and I had dismantled their empire of deceit. Suddenly, a faint sound drifted through the open doors. It started as a low, distant wail, echoing through the quiet, affluent streets of the gated suburban neighborhood. Trevor Head snapped up, his red, swollen eyes widening in fresh terror. Calvin gripped the armrests of his chair so hard his fingers cramped. Brenda froze, her frantic movements stopping instantly. The sound grew steadily louder, piercing the still night air. It was not just one vehicle. It was a chorus of them. Sirens, high-pitched, urgent, and multiplying by the second. Red and blue lights began to reflect faintly against the dark windows of the surrounding mansions. The wailing screams of the approaching police cruisers grew deafeningly loud, tearing through the neighborhood and speeding directly toward Chloe's massive front gates. The blinding flash of red and blue lights swept violently across the manicured front lawn, illuminating the very terrified faces of the remaining guests. Heavy tires crunched over the pristine, crushed gravel of the circular driveway. Two marked police cruisers aggressively boxed in the entrance, cutting off any possible escape route. Behind them, a sleek black SUV glided to a halt. Its tinted windows offered no hint of who was inside, but the sheer aggressive presence of the vehicle screamed federal authority. The heavy wooden front doors of the estate had been left wide open by the fleeing socialites. I stood calmly beside Marcus and Arthur, watching as the chaotic reality of the situation finally breached the threshold of Chloe's perfectly curated suburban fortress. A sharp collective gasp echoed through the cavernous living room as heavy boots hit the front porch. The wealthy guests who had been too slow or too paralyzed to escape right now scrambled backward, pressing themselves tightly against the expensive wallpaper. They held their collective breath, desperate to remain invisible. Trevor remained slumped against the sliding glass door, his chest heaving with erratic, shallow breaths. He stared at the approaching flashing lights like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive freight train. Calvin staggered backward, gripping the edge of the kitchen island to keep his legs from entirely giving out. Brenda let out a high-pitched, shrill gasp, clutching the pearls around her neck, as if the jewelry could somehow physically protect her from the approaching storm. 4 uniformed officers marched into the foyer, their hands resting casually but firmly on their utility belts. They quickly and efficiently fanned out, securing all exits and ensuring nobody else could leave the premises. Behind them, 2 detectives stepped into the bright light of the chandelier. They did not look like standard local police. They wore sharp, dark suits and carried themselves with a cold, calculating precision that immediately commanded absolute respect. The lead detective, a tall, imposing woman with sharp eyes and a stern jawline, scanned the ruined party. She held a thick leather binder in one hand. Her partner, a broad-shouldered man with a closely cropped beard, stepped up beside her. They were specialists. You could instantly tell by the way they evaluated the room, dissecting the power dynamics at a single glance. These were federal investigators specifically trained to dismantle white-collar criminal enterprises and recover stolen cultural property. The female detective locked eyes with me, giving a brief, subtle nod of acknowledgement before turning her piercing gaze directly toward the sweating, trembling mess of a man sitting on the floor. Trevor swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing frantically. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic squeaking sound escaped his dry throat. Chloe backed away from him, pressing her hands over her mouth, shaking her head in violent denial. "Trevor Sterling," the lead detective announced, her voice echoing with devastating authority through the vaulted living room. "I am Detective Reynolds with the Financial Crimes Division. We are executing a federal warrant regarding the illegal trafficking of a protected cultural artifact and the subsequent wire fraud committed across international borders. We have obtained certified bank records, digital contracts, and direct communications linking your personal credentials to an illicit offshore shell company." The sheer weight of the official charges hung heavily in the air. Trevor let out a loud, wretched sob. He scrambled to his feet, his expensive linen trousers wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. He held his hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. "There's been a massive mistake," he babbled frantically, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "I did not know it was a federal artifact. I swear to you I was just liquidating an unused family asset. My father-in-law told me it was his property to sell. I was just following his instructions. It was all his idea." Calvin had snapped up, his eyes widening in pure absolute horror as Trevor threw him entirely under the bus. "You cowardly, lying bastard!" Calvin roared, stepping forward with his fists tightly clenched. "Do not you dare try to pin this unmitigated disaster on me. I do not know anything about offshore accounts or digital crypto wallets. It was his idea, Detective. Trevor organized the buyer. Trevor set up the shady broker. We just moved the piano because he said he needed capital for his legitimate business." Trevor pointed a shaking, frantic finger directly at Calvin's face. "You broke into the house," Trevor screamed, his voice reaching a hysterical shriek. "You and Brenda. You drove your truck to Maya's house when she was not home. You took a crowbar and you broke the lock on her back door. You stole the piano and brought it to my warehouse. You are the ones who physically committed the robbery." They simply exchanged a knowing glance. Detective Reynolds stepped forward seamlessly, cutting through the chaotic screaming. She reached to the back of her belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic clinking sound immediately silenced the entire room. Trevor squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the inevitable arrest. He held his trembling wrists out in front of his chest, completely surrendering to his terrible fate. But Detective Reynolds walked directly past the sweating venture capitalist. Her broad-shouldered partner moved in perfect synchronization, matching her deliberate, powerful stride. They bypassed Trevor completely and stopped directly in front of my stunned parents. Calvin's jaw dropped open in silent disbelief. Brenda let out a soft, terrified whimper, stepping backward until she hit the marble countertop. "Calvin Sterling and Brenda Sterling," Detective Reynolds said, her voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "You are both under arrest for breaking and entering and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The heavy steel cuffs snapped shut around Calvin's wrists, echoing loudly across the massive room. Calvin stared at his constrained hands. He opened his mouth to unleash a tirade of corporate rage, but Detective Reynolds sharply tugged him forward, extinguishing his final ounce of patriarchal dominance. Brenda thrashed against the unyielding grip of the broad-shouldered detective. Her pearl necklace snapped under the pressure, scattering tiny white beads violently across the pristine tile floor. She screamed frantically about her elite country club memberships, her flawless reputation, and her unquestionable innocence. The detective ignored her hysterics, reciting her Miranda rights in a flat, monotone voice as he maneuvered her toward the open front doors. The remaining party guests pressed themselves flat against the walls, holding their breath in pure terror. Their eyes were wide, taking in the spectacular public downfall of the Sterling family patriarch and matriarch. The flashing emergency lights from the police cruisers outside painted Brenda's terrified face in harsh colors as she was shoved ruthlessly into the back seat of a marked vehicle. Detective Reynolds pivoted seamlessly, her heavy boots crunching loudly over Brenda's scattered pearls. She marched directly toward Trevor, who was cowering pathetically by the sliding glass patio doors. Stand up, Trevor, she commanded, leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Trevor scrambled awkwardly to his feet, his knees knocking together in visible terror. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to summon the arrogant, wealthy venture capitalist persona that had defined his adult life. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Trevor demanded, his voice shaking so violently he could barely enunciate the words. "I manage billions in offshore portfolios. I play golf with the district attorney. You cannot just barge into my private residence and arrest me without a formal warrant. I demand to call my legal counsel immediately. I am going to sue this entire department for harassment and defamation." Detective Reynolds did not even blink at his empty threats. She grabbed his arm, twisting it expertly behind his back, and slammed him face first against the thick glass of his own patio door. "You can call whoever you want after processing," she stated coldly. The second pair of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Trevor's wrists. He let out a loud, undignified yelp of physical pain. "This is an illegal search and seizure," Trevor shrieked, spitting against the glass panel. "You have absolutely no jurisdiction over international blockchain transfers. My expensive lawyers will have your badge for this outrage." The male detective chuckled darkly, stepping up to assist his partner. "Actually, Trevor, since you routed the funds through a flagged server in the Cayman Islands to deliberately bypass federal taxes, you triggered an automatic multi-agency jurisdiction. The FBI, the IRS, and the SEC are all currently racing each other to see exactly who gets to freeze your assets first." The remaining guests began whispering furiously to one another. Cell phones were discreetly pulled out, capturing the humiliating spectacle for the inevitable local country club gossip mill. Trevor, the financial genius, who supposedly possessed the golden touch, was being publicly frog-marched through his own lavish living room like a common street thug. He stumbled awkwardly over his designer loafers, weeping openly, begging the detectives to loosen the cold metal cuffs, digging painfully into his skin. Chloe watched her husband utter degradation with wide, unblinking eyes. She was not crying for his well-being. She was not mourning the sudden terrifying loss of his freedom or the impending federal prison sentence looming darkly over his head. She was violently mourning her own carefully curated reality. Her knees suddenly gave out from underneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the floor, her expensive silk dress pooling around her in a wrinkled, ruined mess. She grabbed her perfectly styled hair, completely destroying the expensive salon blowout she had gotten specifically for this important party. "My brand?" she gasped, rocking back and forth on the hard tile. "My entire brand is completely ruined. Everyone in this room is recording this disaster. It is going to be on every single gossip blog by tomorrow morning. What am I supposed to tell my thousands of followers?" The fact that her husband had maliciously stolen from a child and committed a massive federal crime did not even register on her narcissistic radar. Trevor was forcefully hauled right past her, his face flushed red and heavily streaked with terrified, pathetic tears. He dragged his feet across the expensive floor, attempting to resist the forward momentum. "Chloe, please, you have to help me," he begged, sobbing uncontrollably as the stone-faced detectives physically dragged his dead weight toward the massive front door. Chloe did not even look at his tear-stained face. She crawled directly toward me, stopping abruptly at my feet. She looked up, her dark mascara running down her pale cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. Her manicured hands reached out, grabbing the bottom hem of my coat. "Maya," she pleaded, her voice a desperate, high-pitched whining sound. "Maya, please, you have to fix this right now. You have to tell them it was just a simple misunderstanding. Tell the detectives it is just a silly family dispute. Tell them we can just give the money back. If Trevor goes to federal prison, the government will seize this massive house. They will take my luxury cars. They will take my bank accounts. I will have absolutely nothing left in this world. You cannot let them do this to me. We are sisters, Maya. Family always protects family. You have to save me from this nightmare." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman desperately clutching my coat. I thought about the constant, condescending remarks about my cramped house and my supposed lack of ambition. I thought about her standing in my living room, completely unapologetic, after stealing my son's inheritance to fund her lavish lifestyle. I slowly reached down and pried her acrylic nails off my coat. I took a deliberate step back, leaving her entirely alone on the floor. "Try Uber," I said. I turned my back on her, leaving her sobbing on the cold tile floor. The police finished their sweep and escorted the remaining guests off the property. 3 days later, I sat in my spacious downtown office, staring out the large windows at the bustling city below. Arthur walked in holding a thick manila envelope. He placed it carefully on my desk, smoothing the top flap. It was the official police report and the federal indictment summary. The government moved with terrifying speed when offshore accounts and stolen cultural properties were involved. I opened the heavy document file up immediately. Trevor was currently sitting alone inside a federal holding cell. His high-priced defense attorney had completely failed to secure his release during the arraignment hearing. The presiding judge looked directly at the massive international wire fraud charges and immediately denied bail. Trevor was officially deemed a severe flight risk due to his extensive offshore connections and hidden crypto wallets. There would be absolutely no comfortable house arrest or ankle monitor for the golden child husband. He was going to wait for his trial behind cold iron bars. The harsh reality of federal prison completely shattered his arrogant, wealthy facade. Calvin and Brenda were facing their own brutal legal nightmare now. They were formally charged with breaking and entering alongside grand larceny. The local prosecutor strongly refused to offer them any lenient plea deals, given the overwhelming physical evidence and their ridiculous attempts to blame Trevor for the physical theft. Their pristine country club reputation was completely obliterated overnight. The elite social circles they had sacrificed everything to impress immediately turned their backs, abandoning my parents to their public humiliation. Calvin was forced to leverage his remaining depleted retirement funds just to secure basic legal representation for them both today. Chloe experienced the most spectacular financial freefall of them all. Without Trevor income to sustain her ridiculous spending habits, her entire fake empire collapsed instantly. The federal authorities froze every single one of their joint bank accounts the morning after the arrest. They seized his investment portfolios and locked down their remaining assets, pending the ongoing fraud investigation. Chloe was left with absolutely nothing but the clothes in her closet and a wallet full of rejected platinum credit cards. Her exclusive lifestyle evaporated like mist, leaving behind a mountain of suffocating unpaid debts and angry, persistent creditors calling her constantly. The massive suburban fortress she had paraded across social media was built entirely on a foundation of lies. The mortgage had not been paid in 6 long months. With the bank accounts officially frozen, the lenders wasted absolutely no time. The estate was immediately pushed into pre-foreclosure proceedings. The humiliating legal notices were taped directly to her front door for all her wealthy neighbors to see. The luxury vehicles leased under Trevor Company name were quietly repossessed in the middle of the night. Chloe watched her perfect, curated reality physically towed away, unable to do anything but weep softly. Her popular social media accounts went completely silent overnight. The woman who previously documented every single sip of expensive champagne and every designer shopping spree suddenly vanished from the internet. She rapidly deactivated her profiles when the vicious comments started pouring in. People she considered her closest friends were gleefully sharing the news of Trevor's federal indictment online. The same women who drank her wine were now viciously mocking her massive downfall on public forums. She was isolated, broke, and entirely humiliated. The Golden Sister had finally crashed into the harsh, unforgiving pavement of reality, with zero safety net remaining. I reviewed the final page of the comprehensive report, feeling a profound sense of ultimate closure. The beautiful piano was safely returned to my living room where it belonged. My gifted son would never know the dark depths of their bitter betrayal. I had successfully excised a highly toxic infection from our daily lives. Arthur poured me a fresh cup of coffee, offering a rare, genuine smile across the desk. "We won, Maya," he stated simply and confidently. The company is secure and your family is perfectly safe. I nodded, taking a slow sip of the dark, hot liquid roast. I was finally completely ready to move forward and focus entirely on my own prosperous, bright future. My rare moment of peace was violently interrupted by a sudden loud commotion echoing from the reception area directly outside my office. I heard my assistant Sarah shouting in a highly panicked voice, demanding someone stop immediately. Heavy, uneven footsteps pounded rapidly down the polished hardwood hallway. Security guards were yelling strict commands, their radios squawking loudly. Arthur instantly stepped between me and the heavy glass door, sliding his hand inside his tailored suit jacket. Before he could intercept the frantic intruder, the door burst entirely open. It slammed incredibly hard against the wall, vibrating violently. Someone had completely bypassed building security and barged directly onto the executive floor. Chloe stood in the doorway, heaving for breath. She was completely unrecognizable. The flawless socialite who never left the house without perfect makeup and designer heels was entirely gone. She was wearing baggy, stained gray sweatpants and an oversized faded college hoodie. Her hair was a tangled, greasy mess, pulled into a haphazard bun. Dark purple bags hung heavily beneath her bloodshot, frantic eyes. She looked absolutely unhinged, a broken woman pushed far past the brink of sanity. Two large security guards rushed up behind her, grabbing her arms, but she fought them off with a sudden, wild, feral, desperate strength. "Get your hands off me!" Chloe screamed, thrashing wildly against the guards. "I need to speak to my sister right now. Maya, you have to listen to me." I raised my hand, signaling the guards to pause but remain close. Chloe stumbled forward, falling heavily onto her knees right in front of my mahogany desk. She gripped the edge of the wood, her knuckles turning white, demanding to speak to me right away. "Maya! Maya, you have to listen to me!" Chloe pleaded, her voice cracking as she stared up at me from the floor. Her knuckles were stark white against the dark mahogany of my desk. The guards immediately moved forward to physically drag her out, but I raised a single hand, stopping them in their tracks. I wanted to hear exactly what delusion she had managed to construct this time. "Let her speak," I instructed the guards, leaning back into my leather executive chair. Chloe scrambled to her feet, wiping her running nose with the sleeve of her oversized, stained hoodie. She was a complete and utter unmitigated disaster. "You have the piano." "Maya," Chloe stammered, pointing a shaking finger toward the window as if the massive instrument was sitting right outside the building. "You got your precious Steinway back safely. The federal agents literally rolled it into your living room yesterday afternoon. I saw the pictures online before my accounts were entirely seized. So you possess exactly what you truly desired." I stared at her, maintaining a perfectly neutral expression. "And what exactly is your point, Chloe?" "My point is that you also have the $89,000, Chloe," shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "You paid that specific money to the offshore broker. But the feds instantly froze all of Trevor's accounts. We cannot access a single cent. The bank locked down the huge house. They took the expensive cars. My young son and I have absolutely nowhere to go, Maya. We are literally sleeping on an inflatable mattress in my friend's damp basement. You have the piano, so you need to give me that money back right now." I blinked slowly, processing the sheer staggering weight of her absolute limitless delusion. The silence in the office was deafening. Arthur stood perfectly still in the corner, watching her like she was an exotic, unpredictable specimen in a zoo. "You barged past my entire security team, risking prompt arrest to demand I hand you $89,000, I asked, my tone dropping to a highly dangerous whisper. "You genuinely want me to refund you the money I used to buy back the piano that your criminal husband stole from my innocent child?" "It was not his fault," Chloe cried defensively, gripping the edge of my desk again. "Calvin and Brenda broke the lock. Trevor was simply trying to fix his failing investments. He is a victim in this horrible situation too. And you have millions upon millions, Maya. You independently run this incredibly massive company. $89,000 is literally pocket change to a billionaire like you. I need it to hire a highly decent defense attorney. I strongly need it to secure a decent, comfortable apartment. You certainly owe me this as my blood sister. I let out a loud, harsh, totally humorless laugh that aggressively echoed against the thick glass walls of my spacious office. I completely do not owe you a single solitary thing. Chloe, I said, standing up extremely slowly to tower ominously over her frame. And you quite clearly possess absolutely zero comprehension regarding exactly how the strict federal justice system actually operates. Let me explain basic forensic accounting to you in simple terms, even you might miraculously understand. I intentionally walked around the heavy desk, pacing deliberately across the room. The exact money I wired directly to that shady offshore broker is currently sitting tightly secured in a federally seized asset account. It is formally classified as hard physical evidence in a massive ongoing wire fraud and international trafficking criminal investigation. The FBI, the SEC, and the IRS are all currently dissecting every single illicit transaction Trevor ever made. Even if I foolishly wanted to hand you that money, which I absolutely do not, it is physically locked inside an impenetrable government vault until Trevor criminal trial finally concludes. Chloe shook her messy head violently, stepping backward in complete denial. No, no, you are completely lying. You are an untouchable billionaire. You can just casually write me a blank check. You can wire the liquid funds directly to a brand new account. You are just being horribly vindictive. I am being factual, I countered incredibly sharply. You happily allowed your husband to steal directly from my young son to blindly fund your pathetic, superficial designer lifestyle. You willingly turned a blind eye to his extremely shady crypto investments because you greatly enjoyed the luxury cars and the elite country club memberships. You willfully lived in a highly delusional bubble of entirely stolen wealth. Now that delicate bubble has violently popped permanently. Trevor is currently facing 10 to 20 long years inside a federal penitentiary. Calvin and Brenda are currently facing very serious state charges for blatant grand larceny. Your entire fraudulent empire is completely gone, Chloe. She suddenly collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her red face deeply inside her trembling hands, sobbing loudly. Her thin shoulders heaved as the crushing, inevitable reality finally began to violently pierce her incredibly thick armor of lifelong denial. What am I supposed to do? She wailed aloud, her ragged voice muffled. I have never worked a real job. I do not possess a college degree. I do not know how to survive like this. How am I supposed to effectively feed my only son? How am I possibly supposed to pay for Trevor? Monthly commissary. I walked smoothly back behind my desk and decisively opened the top drawer. I firmly pulled out a single crisp piece of white paper and smoothly slid a job application for a receptionist position across the desk. You need a job to pay for your husband, commissary. Fill this out or get out. Chloe stared at the paper in pure, unadulterated horror before throwing it forcefully onto the carpet. She furiously stormed out of my office, her blinding pride still heavily shielding her from absolute reality. She literally learned absolutely nothing at all today. She was totally doomed. 2 days after Chloe's humiliating exit, my private office line rang with a sharp tone. My assistant transferred the call, warning me it was criminal defense attorney Robert Harrison. Harrison did not waste any time launching into a desperate, calculated pitch on behalf of his clients Calvin and Brenda Sterling. They are looking at a mandatory minimum of 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary for the grand larceny charges, Harrison explained, his voice laced with underlying panic. The prosecutor is entirely unwilling to negotiate a plea deal because of the high monetary value of the stolen Steinway and the horrific optics of targeting a grandson. However, the prosecutor indicated that a formal character reference letter from the primary victim might sway the judge to grant leniency during the upcoming sentencing hearing. You want me to write a character reference for the people who broke into my home and stole my child piano? I asked, my tone devoid of any warmth. They are your parents, Maya Harrison pleaded, shifting his tactic to emotional manipulation. They are elderly, and the county jail environment is taking a severe physical toll on them both. They just need a single letter highlighting their past good deeds to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. I told Harrison to arrange a formal visitor center meeting for the following morning. The county jail visitor center was a bleak, sterile room smelling strongly of industrial bleach. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an annoying hum. I sat at a scratched metal table waiting patiently. The heavy steel door buzzed loudly and opened. Calvin and Brenda shuffled into the room side by side. The transformation was absolutely staggering. Gone were the tailored Italian suits and the expensive designer dresses. They both wore oversized, bright orange county jumpsuits. Calvin's perfectly styled silver hair was an unkempt, greasy mess. Brenda's face was entirely pale and devoid of cosmetics, making her look 20 years older. Their former patriarchal and matriarchal dominance had been entirely stripped away by the harsh reality of the criminal justice system. They sat down across from me. Brenda immediately reached her trembling hands across the cold metal table, attempting to grasp mine. "Maya, thank God you came," she sobbed. "This place is an absolute nightmare. The guards treat us like common animals. You have to write that letter to the judge. You have to tell them we are decent people who simply made a terrible temporary lapse in judgment." I smoothly pulled my hands back. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a single glossy photograph, sliding it deliberately across the scratched metal surface. Calvin and Brenda stared down at the image. It was a high-resolution photograph of a torn, crumpled piece of paper expertly taped back together. "Do you remember this?" Brenda, I asked, my voice perfectly flat. Brenda swallowed hard, her eyes darting away. "I do not know what that is," she lied, her voice shaking. "It is my acceptance letter to the Juilliard School of Music," I stated clearly. "You ripped it into tiny shreds right in front of my face when I was 18 years old. You stood in the kitchen and told me music was a pathetic, useless hobby for failures, and no daughter of yours was going to embarrass the family by becoming a starving artist. You completely destroyed my hard-earned future because it did not align with your superficial country club narrative. When I refused to study finance, you cut me off, forcing me to work 3 jobs to survive." Calvin cleared his throat, attempting to summon his old authority. "We were trying to protect you from a difficult life, Maya. You were being controlling narcissistic bullies," I countered sharply. "You destroyed my property then because you hated my independence. Last week, you literally broke into my secure home and stole my son's piano because you wanted to fund your golden child fake empire. There was no lapse in judgment. This is exactly who you have always been. You take what you want and destroy whatever stands in your way." Brenda began weeping openly, burying her pale face in her hands. "Please, Maya," she choked out. "We cannot survive 5 years in prison. We will lose everything. We are begging you." "I am not going to write a character reference letter," I said, leaning back. "You have 0 good character to reference. However, the prosecutor relies heavily on my direct cooperation regarding the breaking and entering charges specifically. I am the primary witness." Calvin's head snapped up, a desperate glimmer of hope igniting in his tired eyes. "What are you saying?" he asked. "That will instantly remove the burglary enhancement, drastically reducing your mandatory minimum sentence. You will likely avoid state prison and serve house arrest instead." "Oh, thank you," Brenda cried. "We promise we will make this up to you." I held up a single finger, stopping her instantly. "I will drop the breaking and entering charges on one condition. You sign over your full rights to Grandpa Marcus' future estate directly to Leo," I stated, sliding a thick legal document out of my briefcase. I placed a heavy black ink pen on top of the crisp white pages. Calvin eyed the document with immediate suspicion. "What is this?" he asked hesitantly. I looked directly into his eyes, letting the absolute finality of my words sink in. "You will formally, irrevocably renounce all claims to the family trust and the investment portfolios. Everything skips your generation entirely and goes straight into a secure, impenetrable trust fund for my son." Calvin's face turned purple with sudden, intense outrage. He slammed his fist down on the metal table. "You cannot possibly be serious," he shouted. "That is millions of dollars. That is our entire remaining safety net. You are trying to leave us completely destitute. You left me entirely destitute at 18, I reminded him coldly. You tried to leave my son without his prized instrument just to cover Trevor's massive criminal debts. You have absolutely no leverage here, Calvin. You can either sign away an inheritance that you do not actually deserve, or you can spend the next 5 years wearing that orange jumpsuit sleeping on a thin cot. The choice is yours. Brenda grabbed Calvin's arm, her fingers digging frantically into his orange sleeve. Sign it, Calvin, she whispered frantically. We cannot go to prison. We will not survive it. We have to sign it right now. Calvin stared at me, his chest heaving with defeated, suppressed rage. He looked at the legal document, then at the photograph of the torn acceptance letter, and finally at his weeping, desperate wife. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. With a shaking, defeated hand, he picked up the heavy black pen. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line, officially signing away his entire luxurious future. Brenda snatched the pen from him and quickly added her own signature, sobbing the entire time. I calmly retrieved the document, slipping it safely back into my leather briefcase. I stood up, smoothing my coat and looking down at the two broken people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I turned around and walked out of the visitor center, leaving them to face the harsh, desolate reality of their new, diminished lives. The heavy metal doors of the county jail slammed shut behind me, sealing Calvin and Brenda inside their self-made purgatory. I walked out into the bright sunlight, taking a deep, cleansing breath. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket before I reached my car. It was Detective Reynolds calling with the exact news I had been waiting to hear since this nightmare began. The federal prosecutor had officially signed the release forms. The grand jury secured the indictment against Trevor, making the retention of stolen property unnecessary for the trial. My son's stolen legacy was coming home. I arranged for a specialized team of professional art handlers to transport the delicate instrument. 2 days later, a massive climate-controlled truck backed up my driveway. I stood on the front porch with my arms crossed over my chest, watching intently as the heavy hydraulic lift lowered to the ground. 4 burly men stepped out carefully, guiding a heavily padded custom crate down the ramp. They moved with absolute precision, treating the cargo with the immense respect it rightfully deserved. Bring it straight into the front parlor, I instructed, holding the double oak doors wide open. The movers expertly navigated the entryway, rolling the heavy cargo across the polished hardwood floors. They unfastened the thick protective straps and slowly peeled back the quilted moving blankets. The 1920s Harlem Renaissance Steinway emerged from its cocoon completely unharmed. The rich, dark mahogany wood gleamed beautifully under the warm living room lights. The intricate hand-carved details along the heavy wooden legs looked magnificent. This was not an expensive piece of furniture or a quick source of cash for desperate criminals. It was a priceless piece of family history representing my grandfather's incredible journey and his profound, enduring love for music. I signed the delivery manifest and thanked the team before they quietly departed. The house fell completely silent. I walked over to the piano and ran my fingertips gently across the pristine, polished lid. The cold wood gradually warmed under my touch. I had successfully protected the one thing my parents tried so viciously to destroy. The toxic generational trauma that had infected our family tree for decades was finally permanently severed. Mom Leo called out, his voice echoing slightly as he walked down the main staircase. He stopped dead in his tracks the moment he reached the bottom step. His eyes went incredibly wide, staring at the beautiful instrument sitting perfectly in the center of the room. He did not say a single word. He did not need to. Leo walked slowly toward the piano, as if approaching a living, breathing creature. He pulled out the padded leather bench and sat down, adjusting his posture with practiced ease. He lifted the heavy wooden key cover, revealing the pristine black and white ivory keys beneath. He rested his small hands gently on the keys, taking a deep breath. Then he began to play. His fingers danced rapidly across the keys, unleashing a breathtakingly complex classical melody that instantly filled every corner of the house. The rich, resonant acoustics of the historic Steinway reverberated through the floorboards, vibrating with pure, unadulterated emotion. The music swelled and dipped, carrying notes of deep sorrow, profound triumph, and ultimate resilience. It was a highly sophisticated piece far beyond what any normal child his age should comprehend, let alone execute with such flawless raw passion. He poured his entire soul into the intricate performance, completely lost in the beautiful music. I turned my head and looked toward the corner of the room. Grandpa Marcus sat quietly in his favorite worn leather armchair. He arrived an hour earlier specifically to witness the delivery. His frail hands gripped the wooden armrests tightly as he listened to his great-grandson play his beloved piano. A single tear escaped his eye, tracing a slow path down his deeply wrinkled cheek. He reached up with a trembling hand and wiped it away, but the proud, radiant smile on his face was unmistakable. The true legacy of our family was safe. It was no longer a tool for manipulation or a bargaining chip for greedy relatives. It belonged entirely to the next generation, where it would be cherished. I leaned against the doorframe, letting the beautiful music wash over me. For the very first time in my entire life, I felt entirely secure. My phone buzzed sharply in my pocket, interrupting my quiet reflection. I pulled it out and checked the bright screen. It was an automated breaking news alert from a prominent local legal blog I subscribed to regarding the federal investigation. Trevor Sterling officially sentenced to 6 years in federal penitentiary for international wire fraud and money laundering. The federal judge showed absolutely zero leniency during the swift sentencing hearing. The prosecution successfully painted Trevor as a highly calculated, remorseless predator who willfully exploited innocent victims to fund a lavish criminal lifestyle. 6 years in a federal facility would completely break whatever remained of his arrogant facade. There would be no early parole. A second message arrived immediately after from Arthur. He had been keeping strict tabs on my parents' living situation just to ensure they remained far away from my family. Calvin and Brenda officially vacated their massive estate yesterday afternoon. With their entire inheritance legally signed over to Leo and their assets completely drained by legal fees, they had absolutely no financial options left. Arthur informed me they signed a lease on a tiny rundown one-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood. Their former elite country club friends completely shunned them, refusing to even return their phone calls. They were isolated, despised, and broke. I slid the phone safely back into my pocket, turning my full attention back to my brilliant son. He struck the final resonant chord, letting the beautiful sound echo slowly into absolute silence. The brutal war against my family was officially over. I had finally secured our perfect, peaceful future. We were now entirely free. Exactly 6 months passed since the heavy steel doors of the county jail visitor center closed on my former family entirely. The bitter, freezing winds of that desperate winter melted away, surrendering to the bright, humid embrace of a warm New York City summer evening. I stepped out of the sleek black town car onto the pristine sidewalk directly outside of a legendary concert hall. The glowing marquee lights above painted the busy street in brilliant shades of gold and bright white. I smoothed the long flowing skirt of my emerald green silk evening gown, taking a slow, deep breath. Grandpa Marcus stepped out of the vehicle right behind me, looking incredibly sharp in his tailored black tuxedo. He offered me his arm with a proud, radiant smile, illuminating his wrinkled face. I looped my arm gently through his, allowing him to escort me up the wide stone steps toward the grand entrance. Tonight was the highly anticipated annual gala hosted by the prestigious National Heritage Foundation. This was not the fake, superficial country club crowd my parents desperately chased around blindly. These were genuine, lifelong philanthropists who truly appreciated authentic cultural legacies and fiercely protected rare historical artistic contributions. We walked slowly through the massive, ornate front lobby, marveling at the towering marble columns and the sparkling crystal chandeliers hanging heavily from the painted ceiling. The wealthy, sophisticated attendees mingled quietly, holding delicate crystal flutes of expensive champagne. They wore understated, elegant jewelry and bespoke suits, projecting a quiet, effortless power that required absolutely zero validation from anyone else. Arthur met us near the grand double doors leading into the main auditorium, handing me a glossy printed program. He gave me a knowing, respectful nod before discreetly stepping back to allow Marcus and me to enter the grand theater. The interior of the legendary auditorium was absolutely breathtaking, featuring tiered balcony seating and incredible acoustic architecture designed specifically for acoustic perfection. Marcus and I easily found our premium front row seats, sinking into the plush red velvet cushions. The low hum of sophisticated conversation gradually faded away as the heavy stage curtains slowly began to part. A single bright white spotlight illuminated the center of the massive wooden stage, highlighting a magnificent ebony grand piano. My heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of maternal pride, knowing exactly who was about to walk out from behind those beautiful velvet curtains. Leo walked confidently onto the grand stage wearing a perfectly fitted miniature black tuxedo that matched his great-grandfather perfectly. The large, sophisticated crowd immediately fell into a respectful, hushed silence, watching the young prodigy approach the massive instrument. He did not look nervous or intimidated by the thousands of expectant eyes focused entirely on his small frame. He slowly bowed deeply to the audience, projecting a calm, mature grace that far exceeded his young years. He took his seat on the leather bench, adjusting his posture and resting his small hands delicately above those pristine white piano keys carefully. The very first chord he struck resonated with absolute flawless clarity, instantly captivating every single person in the massive auditorium. He was playing a highly complex, original composition that beautifully blended classical technical precision with soulful, modern emotional depth. The music washed over the silent crowd, carrying them on an incredible sonic journey of profound loss, intense struggle, and ultimate joyous triumph. His small fingers danced across the keys with blinding speed and intuitive brilliance, executing complicated runs and heavy emotional crescendos perfectly. I watched my son pour his entire beautiful soul into the magnificent historic wooden instrument right now. I glanced over at Grandpa Marcus, who was completely mesmerized by the beautiful musical performance happening just feet away. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed freely down his weathered cheeks, reflecting the bright stage lights overhead. The toxic generational trauma that had violently suffocated our family tree for so many dark decades was finally permanently severed tonight. My parents could no longer weaponize our heritage or destroy our independent futures to fund their pathetic, superficial lies. The true, authentic legacy of our family was fully protected and currently thriving brilliantly under the bright stage lights of this legendary grand theater. As Leo masterfully navigated the final building crescendo of his breathtaking masterpiece, I felt a sudden distinct vibration inside my small silk evening purse. I discreetly pulled out my phone and glanced down at the glowing digital screen. It was a text message from an unsaved number, but I instantly recognized the desperate, frantic tone of the sender. "Please, Maya, we have absolutely nothing left. We are begging you for help." It was Brenda reaching out from whatever miserable, tiny little rundown apartment she currently inhabited with Calvin, completely shunned and entirely forgotten by their former elite social circle today. Trevor was currently sitting in a cold federal prison cell serving his 6-year mandatory sentence, while my parents rotted in absolute miserable poverty. I stared at the pathetic begging words on the glowing screen, feeling absolutely zero pity or lingering obligation toward the people who tried to ruin me. With a single decisive swipe of my thumb, I permanently deleted the message and completely blocked the anonymous number forever. I dropped the heavy, silent phone back into my silk purse, closing the gold clasp with a satisfying, definitive click. I turned my attention happily back to the grand stage. Leo struck the final resonant chord, letting the beautiful, heavy sound echo perfectly into the absolute silence of the grand auditorium. For a brief, magical second, nobody moved or breathed. Then the entire prestigious crowd erupted into a deafening, thunderous standing ovation. High society philanthropists, wealthy patrons, and legendary artists all rose to their feet, cheering wildly for my brilliant son. He stood up and took a deep, graceful bow, smiling brightly directly at me. I stood up, clapping loudly, returning his beautiful, radiant smile. I had successfully survived the black sheep curse, becoming the architect of my own empire. The ultimate lesson learned from Maya's harrowing journey is that your worth is never defined by a toxic family. True strength lies in walking away from manipulation and boldly reclaiming your independence. Maya endured relentless emotional abuse, massive financial sabotage, and outright betrayal from her parents and sister. Instead of breaking, she transformed that heavy pain into an unshakable empire, fiercely protecting her young son. Family is not merely genetics. It is built entirely on mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine love. Have you ever cut ties to protect your peace? Share your triumphant story in the comments section today.